Hello, my name is Walter. I'm 61 years old. On September 14th, I died in a cornfield on my own farm outside Nebraska.
I want to tell you what happened to me, because I think a lot of you will see yourselves in it.
I farmed the same 800 acres my great-grandfather broke sod on back in the 1890s. Corn and soybeans, same as my father, same as his father before him. For 40 years, I measured my whole life by that land. How many bushels, how many acres held. Whether I was the generation that finally lost what 4 generations before me had kept. The last 6 years had been bad. A drought that wouldn't quit, then another one. Grain prices dropping every time I checked them. I had a loan against next year's crop that kept getting bigger instead of smaller, no matter how many hours I put in. And I put in a lot of hours. I told myself the land needed me. The truth is, I think I needed the land more than it ever needed me. It was easier to fix a broken planter at midnight than to sit across the table from my own wife. Diane moved into her sister's house in town 8 months before I died. She didn't scream at me on her way out. She just said she was tired of being married to a spreadsheet and a weather app. And she wasn't wrong. I hadn't looked her in the eye over dinner in longer than I want to admit. I told myself I was too busy saving the farm to save the marriage. I never once stopped to ask if that math made any sense. My son Caleb is 29. He wanted to sell 300 acres to a solar energy company, enough to pay down the debt and keep the rest of the land free and clear. To me, that felt like handing over a piece of my own grandfather's grave. To Caleb, it was the only way to save what was left. We hadn't finished a full conversation in 3 weeks. Every time he brought up those lease papers, I found a reason to walk out to the shop. My daughter Renee lives in Omaha. She's 33 now. I missed her wedding rehearsal for planting season, and I don't think she's ever really forgiven me for it, and honestly, I don't blame her. She calls her mother every week. She calls me on holidays, mostly out of duty. I used to tell myself I was working so hard for my kids. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to actually be there for them. I'd started keeping a bottle in the tractor cab. Just for the nerves, I told myself. Stopped going to Sunday service at Zion Lutheran, telling myself Sundays were for catching up on work when the weather finally cooperated. Underneath all of it, there was a fear I never said out loud to a single living soul, that if I lost this land, I didn't know who I'd even be anymore. Walter the farmer. That's all I'd ever let myself become. A few years back, I lost a good friend, another farmer in the county, the same hard way too many of us have been losing men out here. Nobody talks about it much. We just quietly stopped seeing him at the co-op, and everybody understood without anyone saying it. I carried that grief around, like a stone in my chest, that I never once set down. I never told anybody it scared me. Men like me don't say things like that. That Tuesday night, I'd had another argument with Caleb about the lease papers. Words got sharp between us, sharper than they should have. He left the kitchen with his jaw tight, and I walked out to the north field alone the way I always did when I couldn't stand being around my own feelings. The corn out there had failed again, whole rows of it, brown and curled up before it should have been. I stood in the middle of it under the tractor lights, and something in me just broke open. I dropped to my knees right there in the dry dirt, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I shouted up at the sky. I asked God why he'd let me work my whole life for nothing, why he'd taken the rain and left me the debt. I wasn't praying, I was accusing. I never got to finish that sentence. My chest seized up so fast I didn't even have time to be afraid of it. 1 second I was on my knees yelling at heaven, and the next, there was a pressure in my chest like someone had reached in and grabbed my heart with a fist. I remember thinking, this is it, and then I remember falling forward into the dirt, and then I don't remember anything at all. Except that's not quite true. Because right after that, I do remember something. I remember floating. I know how that sounds, but I was above the field, looking down at my own body lying face first in the furrow, tractor lights still running, and I wasn't scared. That's the part I still can't explain to people. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in 20 years, like something heavy had finally been set down. I looked down at my hands, and they weren't the cracked, sun-spotted hands of a 61-year-old farmer anymore. I flexed my fingers just to watch them move. I laughed, actually laughed, floating above my own dying body, because it felt like being a kid again, like the first time you jump off a hay bale and realize for 1 second you're flying. Then everything around me started to change. The night sky over my field opened up like a curtain being pulled back, and I was moving through it, fast but somehow gentle, like I was being carried instead of falling. The dark turned to gold. Not sunrise gold. Something brighter and steadier than any sunrise I'd ever watched from a tractor seat. And then I was standing in a field. Not my field, a field that stretched out farther than any horizon I'd ever seen, wheat ripe and golden in every direction, glowing soft like each stalk had its own light inside it. No wind, no dust, no drought cracks anywhere in that soil. I bent down and touched it, and it felt more real than 61 years of dirt under my fingernails ever had. That's when I saw him. He was walking toward me across that field, and I knew, before I could even see his face clearly, exactly who he was. He wasn't wearing robes like the pictures I'd seen hanging in Zion Lutheran my whole life. He had his sleeves rolled up. His hands looked rough, calloused, like a man who'd actually worked a field himself. And his eyes, I've spent my whole life reading weather in the sky and reading worry on my neighbors' faces, and I have never in my life seen eyes like that. Tender. Full of something like grief, but grief that had love wrapped all the way around it. I don't know what I expected to feel standing in front of Jesus. Maybe shame. God knows I'd earned some. Instead, before he even said a word, I felt something crack open in my chest, the same spot where my heart had just given out in that cornfield, except this time it wasn't pain. It was relief. Pure, overwhelming relief, like I'd been holding my breath for 40 years and someone had finally told me it was safe to breathe. I fell apart right there in that field. Not polite tears. The kind of crying that comes up from somewhere so deep you don't even recognize the sound of your own voice. Every year of pretending I was fine. Every night I chose the shop over my wife. Every missed dinner, every short word to my son, every holiday call to my daughter that I let go to voicemail because I was in the middle of something. It all came up at once, and I knelt down in that glowing field and I sobbed like a boy who'd finally been found after being lost a long, long time. And he knelt right down with me. He didn't pull me up. He didn't tell me to stop crying. He just stayed there, close, his hand resting on my shoulder, letting me feel every bit of it, like he already knew and had been waiting his whole existence for me to finally let it out. For the first time since I was a very young man, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself, defend myself, or prove I still had worth to anybody. I just felt held, completely, entirely held. "Walter," he finally said, and my name in his voice sounded like something I'd been called my whole life and never once actually heard. "You've spent your whole life watching the sky for rain. I need you to watch it for something else." I stayed on my knees in front of him for a long moment, just breathing, just being looked at by someone who wasn't judging a single thing about me. Then he reached out his hand, and I took it, and he helped me to my feet like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Walk with me," he said. We moved through that endless golden field together, and as we walked he raised his hand, and the field in front of us shimmered like heat rising off blacktop in July, and it became a window. Not a picture. A window I could see clean through, like I was looking down from somewhere very high, over my own county. I saw it the way you'd see it from a crop duster, except closer, like I could see straight into the windows of the houses. And what I saw broke my heart worse than anything I've seen in 61 years of living. I saw empty pews on Sunday mornings in little churches all over that county, the same churches that used to be packed when I was a boy. I saw farmhouses going dark one at a time, families selling out, moving to the city, porches sitting empty, where there used to be somebody sitting out with a glass of tea in the evening. I saw young men Caleb's age sitting alone in machine sheds at 11 o'clock at night, with nobody to call, and nobody who'd think to call them first. I saw widows keeping their kitchen lights on out of habit, because nobody visited anymore to turn them off for. "You've been counting bushels," Jesus said, and his voice wasn't angry. It was heavy with something closer to sorrow, while I've been waiting on a different kind of harvest. I didn't understand him yet. I told him so. He turned to me, and for a second, that window over the county became something smaller and closer to home. I saw myself. Not the man kneeling in the dirt that night, but years of myself, walking past Diane in the kitchen without really seeing her, sending Caleb a short text instead of driving into town to talk to him face to face. Letting Renee's calls go to voicemail because harvest was 2 weeks out, and I told myself family would still be there when the crop was in. "This land was never just soil, Walter," he said. "It was seed I gave your family a long time ago to grow people. Not just corn, neighbors who checked on one another, tables that stayed full even in a hard year, faith that got handed down like the deed to the house. Somewhere along the way, 4 generations deep, you started believing the ground itself could save you, instead of me. That's why it's felt so heavy on your shoulders. I never asked you to carry it alone." I felt my throat close up. "Is it too late?" I asked him. "For the farm, for my family, for any of it?" He didn't answer right away. He looked out over that shimmering window at my whole county, at every dark farmhouse and every empty pew, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something I can only describe as fierce, protective love. "There is an enemy," he told me plainly, "that has convinced good, hard-working men like you that needing help is weakness, that silence is strength, that your worth is measured in yield and acres and never once in what you break down and admit out loud. That enemy has been quietly starving my people out here of the very thing they were made for, each other. He wants every farmhouse dark and every man alone with his fear at midnight, because a man alone is a man who forgets he's loved." I thought of my friend, the one we quietly stopped seeing at the co-op. I hadn't said his name out loud to anyone in 3 years. I said it to Jesus, right there in that field, and I felt something in my chest finally let go of a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying for him. "He is not forgotten," Jesus said gently before I could even ask. "Not by me, not for 1 second. And Walter, you are not going to become another man this land grieves in silence. That is not the ending I have for your story." I believed him. Standing there, I believed him more completely than I believe anything I've ever seen with my own 2 earthly eyes. "The land was never the thing I was trying to save," he went on. "Your son, who can't sleep some nights for worry. Your wife, still waiting for you to come home to her heart, not just to the house. The young farmers in your own county who think their worth begins and ends with their yield, the same way you did. That is the harvest I am calling you toward. There is a divine harvest coming to this land, Walter. It is not going to come through bigger crops or better prices or a longer growing season. It is going to come through open doors and open tables and men finally willing to say, 'I need help' out loud, instead of carrying it alone into the dark." I stood there and I wept again, but it was a different kind of crying than before. It felt like something inside me, something old and stubborn and prideful, was finally being turned over like fresh soil. "I don't want to leave," I told him. It surprised me how much I meant it. Standing in front of him, held the way I'd never once let myself be held on earth, the thought of going back to that cold cornfield, back to a failing crop and a broken marriage and a son I'd hurt, felt unbearable. "Let me stay here, please." He looked at me with a tenderness that nearly undid me all over again. "I understand that longing more than you know," he said. "But Walter, think of Diane, still hoping, even now, that the man she married is still in there somewhere. Think of Caleb, who needs his father to finally say he was wrong, not about the land, but about what he let the land cost him. Think of every man in your county sitting alone tonight in a dark machine shed, believing nobody would notice if he simply disappeared. If you stay here with me now, who tells them there's another way? Who shows them a table where it's safe to finally say the truth?" He put his hand over my heart, the same spot where it had stopped beating in that field. "I am not sending you back empty," he said. "I am sending you back changed. Go and tend what actually matters. Love your family before you love the land. Open your table before you open your ledger, and tell the men like you, the ones too proud to ask, the ones carrying it alone in the dark, that grief shared is grief halved, and that I am still standing in every field in this county, waiting for someone to let me in." I nodded, even though every part of me was breaking at the thought of leaving that field, leaving him. He squeezed my shoulder one last time, and the golden light around us began to pull apart at the edges, like morning breaking over a horizon. The last thing I remember is his voice, close to my ear, gentle as anything I've ever heard. "Go home, Walter. They're waiting for you." I woke up under fluorescent lights in Mary Lanning Healthcare in Hastings, 2 days after that night in the cornfield. A nurse told me my heart had stopped for 9 minutes before the paramedics got it going again on the way to town. She used the word remarkable. I just laid there and cried, quiet tears, because I already knew what I'd lost leaving that golden field behind, and I already knew what I was determined to do about it. The grief of leaving his presence didn't disappear when I opened my eyes. If anything, I still feel it some mornings, a kind of homesickness for a place I only visited once. But it sits right alongside something stronger now, a determination I've never felt about anything in my 61 years, not even about saving this farm. I called Diane before I called anybody about the farm, before I called the bank, before I called the crop insurance man. I asked her, in person once I was strong enough to drive into town, if she'd come home. Not to run my house again. To be my wife again, with all of me finally paying attention. Caleb came to see me in that hospital bed, and I told him he'd been right about the lease. And more importantly, I told him he'd been right that I'd let the land matter more than him for a long time. We signed those solar lease papers together a few weeks later, at my kitchen table instead of shouting across it. Diane and I started something new that fall. Every Wednesday night, our farmhouse kitchen is open to any farm family in the county who wants a hot meal and some company, no agenda, no sermon required, just a chair at the table. It started with 4 people. It's 40 now, some weeks. I quietly started calling around too, checking on the men I used to just wave at from the truck, asking them straight out how they're really doing and meaning it, and telling them about my friend we lost, and telling them what I saw in that field, and connecting anybody who needs it to people who can actually help. I go to Zion Lutheran every Sunday now. I sit in the back pew most weeks and I still cry through half the service, and nobody there seems to mind. I'm not the man I was on September 14th, kneeling in a dead cornfield, shouting at a God I thought had abandoned me. I know now he was closer than my own heartbeat that whole time. If you're out there carrying something alone tonight, in a shop or a truck or a quiet house, I want you to hear what I heard in that field. You were never meant to carry it by yourself. There's a table with a chair for you, and a father who's been waiting on the porch a lot longer than you think. It's not too late to come home changed the way I did.